Welcome to the Red Chip Poker Podcast, where we share stories and strategies from the game's most fascinating minds. No matter where you are in your poker journey, there's always something new to learn. So let's get right into today's conversation with your host, Robbie Straczynski.
I'm Robbie Straczynski, and today we'll be speaking to an online poker grinder and coach who goes by the name of Weasel. Coach Weasel, welcome to the show.
Thanks very much.
How you doing today?
Very good, thanks. Very good.
Good. Excellent. Well, I know like any good poker player, I know you prefer to keep your cards close to the vest, as it were. But just to know a little bit more about you in the poker realm, why don't you tell us, why did you opt for a career in the online poker front rather than the brick and mortar rooms?
So the truth is, I was never really a poker player. I was more of a gamer. So poker to me was a type of esport. In fact, I don't think I've ever set foot in a casino in my life. I have no intention of ever doing so. At the time, I was interested in playing games. I like to play various competitive games online. And poker, back 10 plus years ago, was really the only way that you could actually make money. There were other esports at the time, but realistically, if you wanted to make a living doing that kind of thing, it's virtually impossible. You'd have to maybe attend, let's say, a tournament that was held maybe once or twice a year. The prize pool would be very, very small. So in terms of professional esport, poker was basically the number one way that you could actually make a decent living online. So that's really how I got into poker.
Fascinating. And you mentioned this was, 10, 11 years ago. That's when you were playing, and I know you're still playing some today. At what point in your career over this last decade or so did you feel ready to say, okay, I can coach players, I can assist them with their game?
So it was never my game plan. I was never thinking, okay, I'm going to do this and I'm going to be a coach after that. I was actually dragged into it, and I don't mind the job. I quite enjoy it. What happened was I'd been playing for a while. I got a reference to a particular training site that was looking for training content. And one of my buddies referred me and said, hey, this guy can make some video content for you guys. It wasn't even an English site, actually. It was a Romanian site, and the videos were going to be translated. Mm-hmm. So I said, okay, sure, I'll make some videos. So I made some videos for that site. They were translated. And from that point, I started getting various requests from people. I was getting requests for private coaching. I was getting requests from different training sites saying, hey, can you make some videos for us as well? We saw some of the videos you made. We liked it. We want to see some more of your content. From that point, I've just had requests from one training site after another. So in a way, I kind of just got dragged into it. It was never really part of my original plan.
Huh, unbelievable. I mean, I know poker obviously is a game of variance. So is this something you said, hey, let's go ahead and do that to sort of have a little bit more stability in your life, I guess?
I've always valued variance-free income. I imagine one of the hardest things to do is to be a professional poker player without any side income. And it's not something that I've really ever had to experience, but I can imagine how tough that would be, where you know that if you have a bad few months and your bankroll is kind of depleted, there's no guarantee you're going to win the following months, that kind of thing. So there are some guys that like to be hardcore and just pure 100% professional poker player. That's fine. But I also think you can take a lot of the pressure off and have a better mental state if you just have a small amount of side income. If you can have your house rent covered, that kind of thing. It takes the pressure off the tables when you're running bad.
Certainly. And I guess, all of us here at the Red Chip Poker Podcast can learn a very important lesson from that, especially an experienced player and coach such as yourself. Well, we've all heard, of course, we all know that the game of poker has changed. Everyone's gotten so much better over the last few years. As a player, is that something that frustrates you? Okay, it's harder to win. Or are you saying, more of the coach's mindset of like, hey, well, people want to go ahead and invest their time, their resources, their money, and hire coaches. So do you see this improvement in players as more of a good thing or a bad thing, personally?
I mean, to some extent, I don't even see the same thing. Because when I run, for example, analysis on the population, I just see that there's so many bad players out there still. And it's true that the player pool has become tougher, but I like to think of this in terms of chess ratings. I don't know if you're familiar with like chess and how they rate the grandmasters and stuff like that.
No, I'm not.
So the idea is they give them a rating. So you get the absolute best players in the world. They're called the grandmasters, and they have a rating which I believe is somewhere around 2,800, something like that. I'm not an expert. The thing with poker is you get the best poker players in the world. And if you were to compare them directly, you'll see these guys basically, if you were to translate that directly into a chess rating, they're probably somewhere in the 1,800 to 2,000 region. In other words, even the best poker players are still very, very weak. at this stage. And it's partly to do with the fact that something like No Limit Hold'em is not a long established discipline. Like you have a look at something like chess, it's been around for hundreds of years. People have had a lot of time to get really, really good. Whereas No Limit Hold'em, it's a relatively new phenomenon. And the average, quote, very good player is still very, very weak in the grand scheme of things. So when you actually run the analysis, you see that there's still a lot of opportunity to generate very high win rates, even in some of the tougher games.
Huh. So yeah, I don't know if it's conventional wisdom, but I know I've been hearing, from so many of the top pros, at least, in the Twitterverse, so to speak, it's Hold'em is a solved game, time to move on. So you're saying very much not so, and that it's just a matter of better game selection?
I mean, it's not even really to do with game selection so much. People have been saying this kind of thing, not just in recent times. I mean, even from back in like 2000s, people started saying, okay, poker's solved now. Well, not from 2000, I mean, the early 2010s, like from 2010, 2011, we had the whole Black Friday incident as well.
Sure.
People have been saying poker's solved since then. Even from before that time, people have been saying poker's solved. People are always going to complain. Basically, what they're saying is they're not generating a positive win rate, or they're not generating the same win rate they were. They don't necessarily know why that is. Maybe they don't want to put the work in on their game. So they have this excuse, which is, it's because poker's getting tougher. It's because everyone's solved the game now, so it's not possible to make money. So I think it's just something that's used as an excuse very often.
Huh. That's very enlightening. And I got to say, as someone who perhaps, myself, I would say, hey, I got to get better at this. Everyone's getting good. I want to go see a coach. Is this sort of like your opening salvo to your students and say, hey, don't worry, there's still plenty of spots? Is that how, coaching 101 begins with you?
Maybe it should be. Yeah, that would be a good idea, I guess. Some marketing techniques there.
There you go. Well, are there any particular aspects of the game that you focus on when you do give instruction to your students?
So one of the things is the way that poker's changed in terms of the way people approach it and the way that coaching should approach poker is that it's become more objective rather than assumptive. So if you kind of dial into a poker conversation that would happen maybe 10 years ago. Imagine you've got two guys they're chatting about, let's say, like a river call example, and whether you should bluff catch against a river bet from your opponent. The conversation would very often be just one guy's opinion against the other guy's opinion. One guy might say something like, he's probably bluffing because his perception of you is going to be weak because you didn't raise at this point in the hand, so therefore his range is probably this, and he thinks your range is this. And what that is a very, very speculative, assumptive conversation. Like, it could be complete nonsense.
Sure.
And that's how people spoke about the game 10 years ago. And to a large part, it's still the way people speak about the game now. The main difference is that we don't need to do that anymore. We have a very objective way of measuring what the best player is in a certain situation. For example, if you want to know whether you should be bluff catching in a certain river situation, you can take a large database of hands. You can take a database of, let's say, 10 million hands. You can have a look at that exact scenario. You can have a look at the exact distribution of your opponent's range over those 10 million hands, i.e. what players are showing up on average in each spot, what their bluffing frequencies are. You can have an objective answer to whether you should bluff catch in that situation. So that's the way that poker coaching is changing, is that it's a lot less someone's subjective opinion and a lot more, this is what the data says, therefore this is the best play, and the data backs that up and proves it. It's no longer one player's subjective opinion against someone else, where you can get two good players saying, okay, you should call here. The other guy says, actually, you should fold here in this spot. When you have that hard data in front of you, you can say, okay, that's definitely a fold in that scenario. And everyone who understands the data is going to agree with that conclusion. So that's the way things are really changing. We're taking a more data-driven approach to the way that poker is taught. And that's what I try and do with my students as well. We focus a lot on the data, and I spend a lot of time doing database analysis as well and looking for leaks that way.
Fascinating. I know I can't help but draw a parallel to all of the major sports. I know it started with baseball with sabermetrics. It wasn't just managers saying, well, this is a big guy, he can go ahead and hit lots of home runs. They actually went ahead and crunched all of the numbers similar to what you're saying. It's a matter of database and how exactly did they perform in this particular situation against left-handed pitchers or things like that, just to draw the baseball analogy. And I know the same is true for football, for basketball. Really, really fascinating. I know you said you haven't even set foot in a brick and mortar casino, but do you believe that this data-driven approach, even in some way, may be applicable or extrapolated to the live game? Is that possible?
It's absolutely possible. The hard part with that is actually getting your hands on the data in the first place. For example, Right now, if I want a database of 50 million hands, I can go and buy that for online hands. Let's say I want a database of 50 million hands played in a brick and mortar casino. Firstly, they might not even have that kind of volume over the last number of years. And the second problem is, even if they did, well, they don't. I mean, how do they store that information? You can't just walk into a brick and mortar casino and say, hey, I'd like to buy the last 10,000 hands that were played in your casino along with the data. That data's not even recorded, right, as far as I know. I mean,
Certainly.
maybe it's recorded on a video camera
videotape,
but
yeah,
you can't process data that way, right? Yeah.
Not something like a hand replayer, that's for sure.
So technically, yes, but in practice, it's just not possible at this stage.
Interesting. So in a sense, I know you said you had the video and the e-gaming background. So in a sense, it very much is similar to that. I mean, it's two different games, basically. It's there's a video aspect or the online aspect and the poker aspect. It might be the same game, but certainly two different approaches. I can certainly respect that.
There is, however, some trends that translate from online to live. And there are some online rooms that play more similarly to live rooms, and you can get access to the data. You take a room like Ignition, for example. The 4-ring games there play very much like the live games in the casino. You can get access to the hand histories. So it's not like we're completely in the dark. There is ways to extrapolate population data for live games.
That is fascinating. That's a nice little teaser for those who may be a little bit more interested there in which rooms to be playing at. Very, very interesting there. Because to me, I don't really play online anymore. They're all just the same, just slightly different software, different, but the same product they're offering. So that's pretty fascinating. Well, I know that Red Chippers, they're likely familiar with you, Coach Weasel, from the work that you've done to produce the core videos, very popular product at Red Chip Poker. Maybe can you talk just a little bit about what was it like for you to put that together?
I remember back when I first started watching training videos, they were always the same length. I don't know why there was just this kind of perception that a training video had to be between 45 minutes and 1 hour. And if it was less than that, that was kind of very, very strange. So with the core videos, many of them are a lot shorter. They're less than 15 minutes. The idea is that you can learn the concept a lot faster. The information is more distilled. It's more engaging to the watcher. So that was the idea with core. There were a number of theory videos. I think they were all less than 15 minutes. They tried to cover the concept as quickly as possible in the most distilled format. And then we moved on to the hand history style videos. And all of those are, I think, less than about 10 minutes each. So if you don't like really, really long training videos, which actually most people don't, research has shown most people like to watch something for probably not more than about 15 minutes. So the core keeps things moving that way. So it's hopefully more entertaining.
It was designed like that from the outset, or that's just sort of how it ended up, when the camera stopped rolling?
That was actually the direction I was given from Red Chip Poker. These are not meant to be 45-minute to an hour video. They're meant to be shorter videos. And I see that it makes sense. And I'm guessing that was probably the reason behind it.
Sure. Definitely makes sense. At least as far as, I know my own personal attention span, and when I'm on YouTube, even when I get sucked down the wormhole, max 15-minute videos. So I get it.
Yeah.
As player skill and overall knowledge has increased, it's a theme that we've already mentioned, in this episode. Since the debut of Core even, it begs the question, though, to what extent do you feel that the skills that someone can acquire from Core can stand the test of time?
So because we're now entering into this age of a more data-driven approach to solving poker, the concepts can now stand the test of time, whereas previously they wouldn't have been able to. You'd get these conversations where one guy says, "Oh, you should never min-raise the button. That's terrible." And the other guy saying you should always pot size, the button. And these are kind of things that we can't verify. We couldn't prove back then. So it's not going to stand the test of time, because as the games change, these things are going to change. The approach itself, i.e. the data-driven approach, is going to stand the test of time. So, for example, when you look at the things in Core, there's a lot of references to the data and how we know certain things. And since you know what it's based on, you can also understand how the strategy would change if those particular statistics of the population were to change. For example, we might say we bluff in a certain spot. The data says villain's folding too much. But hopefully when you watch that kind of thing, you understand that if that data point changes and the population is not folding there in that spot, you're not going to bluff there in that situation. So the approach itself stands the test of time, hopefully.
Sure, and I guess, numbers don't change. Math is math. 2 + 2 is always going to equal 4. I understand that.
Yeah.
Interesting. That definitely some good food for thought there. And when we come back, we're going to dive into Coach Weasel's next endeavor, an exclusive webinar that will be released for the Red Chip Poker members. But first, a little strategy break.
Hey folks, Zach Shaw back for Red Chip Poker, and I just got back from Las Vegas. Had an amazing time seeing faces old and new, from our Red Chip members to our Red Chip coaches to complete strangers at the poker table. And if there's a piece of strategy that I want to impart on you today, and it's not that sophisticated, but go to Las Vegas for the World Series of Poker. If you play poker, I don't think you're going to find softer fields in either the cash games or the tournaments. Now, with softer fields and these huge tournaments like the Big 50 that the WSOP just pulled off, the biggest tournament ever, I think something like 24,000 people registered, you're going to find huge waiting lists. So that's a little strategy tip. If you're going this month, this summer, or next year, keep in mind that the wait lists are going to be long. You're going to want to call in when you can call in. A lot of the rooms now have the ability to text you when your table is ready, so I highly recommend you do that. But oh wow, were the tables soft. Managed to make $50 an hour playing 1-2, no problem. Wish I had more time to play. So that's my strategy for the day. However, there's another tip I've got for you, and that is to join Pro right now, because you're listening to Weasel give you all the tips on c-betting out of position. A few weeks ago, you heard Mike Gano talking about playing from the blinds. Both of these guys are going to be hosting live group coaching sessions for Pro members, and Gano is going to go live on June 26th. That's a Wednesday coming up. And c-betting out of position with Weasel is going to be on July 31st, another Wednesday. So if you sign up in the next few days, you're going to be able to get a huge deal, because you're going to get max value. You're going to get the first group coaching session right away and the second one a month later. And these are also all archived, so you get all the previous ones and all the future ones as long as you stay a Pro member. Highly recommend you check that out at redchippoker.com/membership. It's $50 a month, and it gives you access to everything that we've got, including core and the crash courses. And we've got some really cool new crash courses coming up. And by way of just a little housekeeping and letting you know what's up here at Red Chip Poker, myself and James are going to be on the podcast for the next episode, and we're really going to break down the whole podcast. This is episode 180. 3 generations of hosts will be in one audio channel, and we're going to talk to you about our plans for Red Chip Poker for the future. So don't miss that one. And until next time, run good, play better, get there. Here's Robbie Straczynski with the rest of the Weasel interview on the Red Chip Poker podcast.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the Red Chip Poker Podcast. Robbie Straczynski here with one of poker's great coaching minds. It's Coach Weasel. So all of us in the Red Chip Poker community, we're particularly excited about the upcoming group coaching session that you're going to be leading. It's called C-betting out of position. Can you give us a little bit sort of an overview or a preview of what we can expect?
So naturally, it's going to be about c-betting decisions out of position.
Sure.
One of the things that players have realized in more recent times is you can't just get away with c-betting very, very aggressively out of position. So if you go back 5-10 years, you'd find that players generally had the same c-betting strategy, whether they were in position or out of position. So they'd c-bet maybe 65%, 70% in position. Then they'd have the same c-bet frequency out of position. What players have realized over the last few years is, at least from a theory point of view, to be c-betting out of position 65, 75%, that's technically horrible and something that can easily be exploited. So given that we shouldn't actually be c-betting as aggressively OOP, many good players are c-betting definitely not more than 50%, and you get quite a few guys with c-betting more like 25, 30%. You get guys who are just checking their entire range instead of c-betting. So what that means is any discussion on c-betting out of position also has to deal with what to do after not c-betting, what to do after checking. So how do we defend our checking range? When do we check raise, check call, check fold? That's really going to be the main topic that we're going to be discussing, c-betting and defending checks.
And to what extent, if at all, will bet sizing be one of the subtopics there?
Seeing as we don't c-bet with a very high frequency, I wouldn't say that the specific bet size used for c-bet out of position is going to have a large effect on the generated win rate. So we might touch on the topic. It's not going to be completely irrelevant, but there are other situations in the game where c-bet sizing is going to have a larger effect on win rate.
Got it. Okay, good to know. Do we know when exactly, like a time and date for when this session is going to be taking place and how to join?
So the date is 31st of July. As for the time, I haven't actually been given the time yet. I'm pretty sure it's probably going to be the same time as the previous webinars, whenever that was.
Okay, so folks, clear your calendars. July 31st, we're going to hear Weasel's great coaching session, C-betting out of position. Weasel, why did you choose this specific area of poker strategy to focus on and to produce this group coaching session about?
So I'll tell you straight up here. I was given the topic by Red Chip Poker.
I did not know that.
Yeah. I agree with them. It's a good topic, by the way. But technically, they're the ones that wanted that particular topic covered.
Understood. Well, how long did it? I mean, obviously, you're a highly experienced player and coach. Did you already have a bunch of material prepared on this, or did it? You sort of have to go into the lab and prepare something brand new?
Yeah, I don't really. Basically, every single area of the game tree, I have a set strategy for, so I can usually draw on that when creating content. So there aren't too many things that I really just have to do from scratch these days. So obviously, I already have that strategy, and I'm going to be discussing it in the webinar.
Brilliant. And, I did say clear your calendars, folks, but approximately how long do you feel it would last?
Usually lasts about 90 minutes. And last time that included some time for questions and answers towards the end of the webinar. So if you have any particular burning question, I am talking to the listeners, come to the session and you can ask any of your questions there. Ideally on the topic of c-betting, but if you want to ask anything poker related, that's fine as well. Just come to the webinar. There'll be designated time at the end for that.
Sure. And again, as an experienced coach, and you've given group sessions and webinars before, would you say that there's any particular question from a student or from a listener or someone who's watching the session that sort of like really made you think and challenged your knowledge in any particular way?
I'm sure there's been lots of questions. As for one specific question, I can't think of one right now. There's definitely people that ask me questions that get me thinking. And, it's good for me as well. I mean, if someone asks me a question that's going to get me thinking, then, I don't have a clear response to that question, then it's something that, I can go away and think about, and it can help to improve my own game as well. I mean, they say, for example, that unless there's a common adage, unless you can explain something very simply, it means you don't really understand that concept yourself, right?
Mm-hmm,
sure. So every so often someone will ask me something and I'll answer it, and I believe I might answer it correctly, but perhaps it took me too long. Maybe it took me like a minute longer than it was supposed to if I really understood the topic at the level that I should. So then I can go and think about how to understand that topic better. Next time someone asks me that same question, I'll have like a one-liner that answers that question. And, that's kind of like the proof that I've kind of progressed in that area.
Perfect. And I always do like hearing that from coaches, never sitting on their laurels, always learning even while coaching and from the students. That's always great to hear. Coach Weasel, is there a particular reason why you feel that so many players have difficulty mastering this specific aspect of poker, the c-betting out of position?
So most players would say that constructing a range OOP as the PFR is the second hardest area in potentially poker, but certainly no limit hold'em. Mm-hmm. So the first hardest area is generally considered to be bet sizing, picking the right bet sizing in every spot. You'll find that even if you have very, very good players, the area where they're still likely to have leaks is going to be with their bet sizing. So that's generally the number one hardest area, especially no limit, I guess, when you have a wider range of different bet sizings at your disposal as opposed to something like a pot limit variant. Second hardest area, though, is constructing a range OOP as the PFR. And the very simple reason for that is that we have to think about 4 different ranges that we're going to funnel various holdings into. So we have our c-betting range, we have our check raising range, check calling range, check folding range. So we have to assign the correct hands into each of those 4 components to play correctly in this situation. And not only that, the thing that makes it potentially even more complicated is the fact that if you want to be technically correct in this scenario, there has to be some mixing going on. So the idea is there's going to be some hands that c-bet with some frequency and check raise with some frequency, or check raise with some frequency and check call with some frequency, but potentially. So there's going to be mixes. Some hands will appear in 2 of those 4 different ranges. Some will appear in 3. In extreme cases, they may even appear in all 4, although not necessarily that likely, with different frequencies. So you might find that certain hands mainly c-bet, sometimes check raise, that kind of thing. Now, although we don't necessarily care too much about getting the precise frequencies right, because the truth is no one knows those precise frequencies at this stage anyway.
Right. Mm-hmm.
It is still necessary to employ some level of mixing when playing in this scenario to maximize win rate. So we'll discuss that in the session, which kind of hands want to be mixed, but we will, of course, avoid something that's heavily theoretical. I think one of the mistakes players make in this spot, a very common mistake, is they'll rely too heavily on something like a solver. So they'll pull up PO solver, and before you know it, you're just trudging through a minefield of different numbers, which is not really going to help that much in the long run. c-bet here 61.4% of the time, check raise here 27.9. Even if you could remember that, no one would be able to implement that strategy accurately. It would just be ridiculous to try and do that. So the idea here is to have a strategy that's as simple as possible while still retaining a good degree of accuracy. So that's what we're going to be trying to do in the webinar.
Interesting. And then certainly, people, you've got to have your thinking caps on. This is not something that you can just go ahead and glaze through, sort of sit back. You really need to be concentrating to master the specific aspect. It's said that, Texas Hold'em is the game, like the legendary saying, it takes 5 minutes to learn, the lifetime to master. It's obviously not a lifetime, but as someone who has a great degree of mastery over this concept, so much so that he can teach it, how long would you say a player typically, let's say starting from basic skill level, would need to train themselves both theoretically as well as hours of play to truly master this specific aspect of poker on average?
I mean, the thing is, certainly in my own experience, the time it's taken me is significantly longer than the time it would have taken me if I'd had a direct learning path or I'd had a relevant learning path. You see, the issue is I'm talking about the subjective opinion giving that two players would have, the kind of discussions, the way players would think about how to solve a hand in poker, for example. And so much of it is just garbage. And, I've been through all of that. I've wasted so much time doing that kind of thing and not really improving my game in the process. So, 13 or so years down the line, okay, I've reached a certain level of competence. But, I also feel if I'd known what I know now at the time, rather than the amount of time it's taken me, I probably could have done the same thing in like a year or even 2 years, something like that. So that's why it's good to have an accurate learning path, because you can really waste so much time trying to learn this game. And that's why you'll find guys who've been playing for 20 plus years, longer than me, but they're not necessarily very good players. They have serious problems with their game. Whereas at the flip side of the coin, you're going to find some people that are coming up in the games today where they have got access to a direct and relevant learning path. And, they're going from small stakes to high stakes in a period of like 6 months to a year. So you can do it in short frame of time. Most people will not, though. They'll take a lot longer. And that's simply because they're wasting so much time doing irrelevant things. And, something that many players do, including myself, just waste time without realizing it.
That's a brilliant answer. And I got to say, obviously, someone who's going to go ahead and sign up for this group coaching session, 90 minutes of an investment in your of time and paying attention could really save you so much time, build upon the experience of others. So certainly a worthwhile investment of time. Who would you say, Coach Weasel, is the ideal type of poker player who would need to sign up for and participate in this course?
Well, basically anyone who wants to improve their skills playing OOP as the PFR, and as far as I can see, that's pretty much everyone, because everyone's gonna have leaks in that area, even though if you might not realize it. It is one of the hardest areas of the game. So if you can play well in this spot, you're going to be able to play well in a lot of different scenarios.
Excellent. Well, before we check out, I know I've had a battery of questions for you, but I imagine our listeners here at the Red Chip Poker Podcast might have some of their own. If they have any questions or would like to reach out to you, or perhaps they're interested in a one-on-one coaching session, how would they find you?
Just ship me an email to my Google Mail. It's weasel@googlemail.com, and that's, when I say weasel, that's W34Z3L at googlemail.com. So just feel free to ship me an email.
And the spelling is very important. Everyone's got to pay attention. Well, awesome. I really enjoyed this conversation. Coach Weasel, thank you very much for your time. And there you have it, folks. Hope you've enjoyed this episode of the Red Chip Poker Podcast. Be sure to tune in next time. We've got a very special show in the works for you. I'm your host, Robbie Straczynski, and you've been listening to the Red Chip Poker Podcast.
Thanks for tuning in to this week's episode. But don't stop learning now. Head over to redchippoker.com. You'll find everything you need to get better today. Join our free, friendly strategy group and start talking poker with our coaches and community. And listen, if you're ready to take poker more seriously, sign up for Core, our $5 a week complete training platform built for players who have limited time to study. Core is packed with over 100 bite-sized lessons, from the fundamentals to advanced strategies, quizzes, achievements, discussion threads, and more. And for the bravest of heart, we invite you to check out our Pro membership, which includes 24/7 access to hundreds of videos, all of our playlists, all of our crash courses, and more. If Do you want to see what the top 1% of players are studying to keep their edges razor sharp? Visit redchippoker.com/Ruby. That's RUBY. And get a special deal on your first 3 weeks. Until next time, run good, play better, and get there.